Welcome to Therapy Explained, where we explain, demystify, and destigmatize mental health and mental health treatment. My name is Deniss. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, the clinical director at Talk Therapy, a mental health practice in California that specializes in supporting BIPOC adults in managing imposter syndrome, burnout, and healing generational wounds, which comes as a particularly useful skill for today's video. We're talking about setting boundaries with your family as a BIPOC adult. We've already talked about boundaries in a previous video. Just a quick introduction about how we look at boundaries, what the purpose of boundaries are, and some quick tips to help you practice setting boundaries everywhere, at work, with your family, with your friends. But today we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into setting boundaries with your family in particular, because this can bring up a lot of emotions for us, especially as BIPOC adults. It's a layered experience, which is also why it's so important to have a therapist who understands that through lived experience, but also through work experience, educational training, and working with this population. So I'm going to be using a lot of the interventions, information that I have gathered through the last couple of years in which I've been practicing with BIPOC adults. Without further ado, you know what to do. If at any point in this video you like it, you enjoy it, you would like more of them, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let's just go ahead and jump into the video. Barriers to boundaries. Before getting to the rest of this video, let's talk about what comes up for us, what really makes it so difficult to establish boundaries. Think about it. When you clicked on this video, when you saw the title of it, when you listened to me talk about setting boundaries with your family, what comes up for you emotionally? If you have the space for it or the ability for it, I'd encourage you to write that down now. Write a few emotions that are coming up for you, thoughts that are coming up for you around setting boundaries. Most of the time, those emotions are guilt. They are fear. It's anxiety that comes up for us when we think about setting boundaries with our family. And along with anxiety comes cognitive distortions. Now, if you don't know what cognitive distortions are, I have a whole video on what they are and how to manage them. So go ahead and jump to that video after watching today and after watching this video. But cognitive distortions in general are distorted thoughts that are connected to our anxiety. They're valid fears, and some labels for cognitive distortions can be catastrophizing, so thinking of the worst case scenario, mind reading, so thinking that you can read people's minds, that you're going to know what they're thinking about you or what they're feeling about you. And then there's also fortune telling, which is very similar to mind reading, in which you are telling yourself that you know what's going to happen. Yes, to some degree, you know the people in your life, so you probably have a pretty good idea of what to expect, but you don't always know 100%. It might depend on how they're feeling. It might depend on their experience during that day. It might also depend on your relationship with them, which is constantly evolving. So we don't actually know how people are going to react truly until we actually engage with them in some of these interventions or activities. That aside, all those cognitive distortions, all the anxiety, the fear, the guilt that comes up for us tends to be one of the biggest barriers for us. It becomes so scary and overwhelming that we would much rather not do it. It is just way too uncomfortable. But let's talk about where these emotions are coming from, because the better that we understand where these feelings come from, the better we can address and manage them. Being BIPOC adults means that we're probably a part of a collective culture, and collective cultures value family so much. The family unit. So what happens, particularly in a family unit, when we talk about establishing boundaries within your family, which is so important, right? Your family is everything. You are an extension of your parents. Everyone in this family represents the family as a whole, and that can be a lot of pressure. So when we talk about setting boundaries around that, it sounds like we're pushing away from that, like we're betraying our family in some way, like we're pushing away from them. But what we really are doing is we're just creating breathing room for ourselves. An ability to be able to say, this is where I end, right? And this is where the rest of the family begins. And that is okay. That doesn't mean that you're not connected to them or love them or want to be a part of the unit. And if you don't, that's also okay. But it doesn't necessarily mean that when you establish boundaries. Understanding this context, that going against our collectiveness, our collective culture, our collective mindset into something a little bit more individual of who I am doesn't need to be who the rest of these people are, the rest of my family is. And allowing for some differentiation, right? I don't have to like the same things. I don't have to want the same things like music or food or goals, right? I don't have to want to have a career, or I don't have to want a particular career or life path for myself. I can want different things, and allowing ourselves to be who we are truly and authentically around the people that matter to us the most. So with that context and understanding that that is a piece of it, we can start to give ourselves permission to create breathing room. And remember that more than one thing can be true at the same time. We can want some breathing room, a differentiation between who we are as an individual and our family, and still want to be a part of the family unit, still love them very much, and still identify with them. Along with this understanding comes one of my favorite reframes, one of my favorite new ways to think of boundaries. Boundaries oftentimes are thought of as walls, right? We think these are limits, and so because they're limits, that means that there's got to be this wall that I'm creating around myself. But I challenge you, encourage you to think about boundaries as bridges. You're still building a structure, but you're building a specific path to access specific parts of you. You're able to tell someone, in order to have access to this part of me, this is the path which you need to take, because this is the path in which I feel the safest. And the more that you are able to trust someone because they respect those boundaries, the more bridges that you can give them access to. So with this reframe, you can also start to see that and, right? There's a specific path that has limits, and I'm still creating connection. Knowing your boundaries. Before we communicate them, establish them with the people around us, it's important for us to identify what our boundaries are in the first place. And a really good place to start is by reflecting on our individual relationships with the people around us and identifying spaces and situations in which we have felt frustrated, angry, or resentful towards them. These emotions are usually a pretty good sign that we need a boundary. If you find yourself saying things like, in your head, saying things like, I did this thing for this person and they're not even thankful enough. They didn't respond in the way that I wanted them to, and that makes you upset with them or angry with them or frustrated with them. That's probably a sign that you did something that you actually weren't comfortable with, probably didn't have time to do, or really actually couldn't have done. So you had to sacrifice something of your own needs in order to do this thing for this other person, whether it was a favor or showing up for them or helping them out with something, whatever it was that happened in that interaction, maybe even just swallowing your tongue and not telling them when they're hurting you. All of this is communicating to you that, yeah, you probably made a big sacrifice of your needs in order to please someone else. And remember that we oftentimes do that because we are afraid of what will happen if we don't. There's that anxiety that triggers the catastrophizing, the mind reading, the black and white thinking, right? Of, if I don't do this favor, then I can't be their friend, or they're not going to want to be my friend. And that is black and white thinking. It's one or the other. I'm either going to be liked or hated. Instead of thinking, well, maybe in this moment they might not like me saying no, or they might not like me establishing a boundary, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to still want to be my friend or still love me or care about me, even if they are temporarily upset with me. So if you're starting to think of a few situations, and again, if you have the space and time for it, Start writing some of these moments down. What made you frustrated about a particular person or situation, and what was the need that you sacrificed around that? How can you maybe set a boundary around that particular need? Being able to say that someone hurt your feelings or did something or said something, whether or not it was intentional, that just didn't feel right with you, or establishing a boundary around your time or your emotion or your space with someone about things that make you uncomfortable. Set your boundaries. Okay, now that we've contextualized ourselves, we have a different perspective, and now we are clear on what our boundaries are, the next step is to actually set them. One of my favorite ways to help clients establish healthy boundaries is what I call the XYZ method. It's also called the assertive communication, or I believe it's also nonviolent communication. But the reason I call it XYZ is because it's just the easiest way to remember the components of this model of communication. So the way that it looks like is when you X, I feel Y, and in the future, I need Z. It sounds a little robotic and very therapist-y. So as you practice this, identify what your X, what your Y, and what your Z needs to be, you can find your voice. And learning what your voice is and how setting boundaries feels the most comfortable to you is very important. Because if you don't feel comfortable setting them, it doesn't feel like your voice, you're more likely to feel very uncomfortable when it's happening and also not maintain these boundaries. So this is the start. This is just an introduction. And if you have the space and time for it, I encourage you to grab a piece of paper so we can work on this together. The first part of this is the X. So when you X needs to just be an observation. Try not to assume the other person's intentions. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. What we're doing is just honestly telling them what our experience has been. So what that sounds like, for example, let's say we're trying to communicate to our mother that some of the comments that she's making have been hurtful. So her commenting perhaps on our looks, our weight, our body in some way. So we want to be able to stick to just the facts. When you say that dress looks ugly on you, I feel Y, right? And connected to that emotion. Your why piece is your emotions. And again, it's not the assumption. It's not saying, I feel like you don't care about me. I feel like you're always out to hurt me. That's an assumption. What we want to do again is identify what our emotions are in that moment to be able to communicate to our mother what we're really feeling. I feel hurt, disrespected. So most of the time we're gonna have more than one emotion, and that's okay. List them out, write them out. So when you make comments about the way that I look in my dress, right, whatever that specific comment was, I feel Y. And then we also want to communicate to our mother or whatever person or whomever we're trying to establish this boundary what we need moving forward. Giving the benefit of the doubt to this other person is helpful because we can imagine, okay, this person doesn't know what they're doing, doesn't realize that they're hurting us. So what can we do to communicate to them this doesn't work, and also push them towards what does? So giving them the benefit of the doubt, let's say our mom thinks that this is actually helpful. They're trying to help us look better by giving us what they might think is helpful feedback about how we look. So let's just tell them, okay, fine. When you make a comment about how my dress looks, or when you say that dress looks ugly on you, I feel judged, dismissed, hurt, disrespected. Whichever one or all of the feelings that you want to share with them. And in the future, if you don't like how I look in a dress, I would prefer that you not say anything. What would be most helpful for me is if you tell me when you think that something does look good and provide me with maybe more positive feedback if that's what you want. But again, you can just always say, if you don't like how I look, I'd rather you not say anything because it's not helpful, right? It just ends up hurting me. And that's it, right? If there's another way in which you would be open to this person's feedback, you can also give them an alternate way to do that. But if you're very close and just are not interested in that at all, you don't have to open them or open yourself up to them in any way. even when we follow the structure and we find our voice and we're thinking about boundaries in a different way, they're still going to feel uncomfortable, right? Because remember, when we contextualize ourselves, there's years and years and years of thinking about what is right, about what is appropriate within our family systems and as a collective culture. So pushing away from that will make us uncomfortable, which leads us to our next piece: use coping skills. Using coping skills or coping tools are going to be so helpful for us before, during, and after establishing boundaries. Learning how to self-soothe, how to calm our bodies in preparation for setting a boundary, helps us feel more centered and remember how we want to act in that moment, and really truly be proud of how we responded to that person and how we established our boundary. Coping tools can also come in useful during that, because if we're feeling overwhelmed, upset, irritated, we can take deep breaths, we can pause, we can work on healing and nurturing and soothing ourselves in the moment if that's what we need. And it can also help us after we do it, because even after establishing it, even after feeling proud of doing it, our nervous system might still be turned on because it was scary, especially when it's new. It feels so uncomfortable. We might still feel the guilt. We might still feel the anxiety. We might still try to catastrophize and say, oh my God, that went so wrong. This person's going to be so mad at me. You know, my family member is not going to want to talk to me anymore. We want to try to stay away from that. So challenging those catastrophizing thoughts is extremely important. I encourage you again to watch that cognitive distortions video to help you manage those thoughts. And with the guilt, with the anxiety, with the body-centered discomfort, soothing activities like journaling, breathing, meditation, going for a walk, or going for more soothing activities, right? Coloring, not running, not dancing, because all of that is going to reactivate your nervous system. We're looking to calm it down. So look for calming activities after that. And then again, managing those cognitive distortions and reminding yourself that what you're doing is creating safe and healthy relationships for yourself. And in doing so, you create a healthy and safe life for yourself. You're also modeling for the other person what that ideal version is, and ideally also encouraging them to do the same. I hope today's video was helpful in starting that journey. Now, I know that this won't fix it. That's the whole point. Changing systems, changing patterns, healing wounds takes time. It takes consistency. And a lot of this is learning how to be uncomfortable in the short term, how to help ourselves through that discomfort so that in the long run, we're actually building easier ways to live. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, give it a thumbs up. As always, subscribe if you haven't already. And remember that I'm always cheering for you.